Okay, so today we are in the roles of men and women, part 4. Oh, you're clapping now. Just wait. Okay. There might be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Certainly there may be some bruised ribs, as people like, do you see what he just said? You know, husbands, wives start doing all that stuff. All right, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 today, probably the entire time. All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And we're going to begin in verse 1. Now, we're going to take our time getting through this chapter. We are going to deal with some interesting things. And for those of you with children, some of it may be a little bit sexual in nature, not graphically designed, but a little bit sexual in nature, because the issue that they're dealing with at the beginning of this chapter is intimacy with husbands and wives. Now, there are some things that are in this topic that I'm not going to cover today, because that's for our, what I call it, the Sex 101 teaching I'm going to do at some point. So these things will be much more detailed and being dealt with, like what the issues are. But you'll understand as we get into this. So let's begin in chapter 7 and in verse 1. Okay? And concerning the matters you wrote to me, do we all understand that Paul was, what we're reading is always half a conversation? I didn't even have that in my notes to like make an issue of, but I think it's important to stop right there in mid-sentence and say, when you're reading Paul's writings, this is one of the reasons, if not the major reason, why his writings are hard to understand. Because he's responding. He said, on concerning what you wrote to me. What did they write to him? We don't have that letter. So he's addressing things that were brought up. Just like when I do a zone meeting, people ask questions and I answer them. What if you only heard the answers and not the questions? It could be a little tough. Now that's unique to Paul because everybody else is just writing a general letter to the dispersion. That's what Peter does, and that's what James does, that's what John does, right? But these are to congregations that are having issues and they're asking their head pastor, so to speak, their head overseer, because they had local elders. This is their head though. Hey, Rav Shaul, we don't know what to do with this. And so this makes Paul generally more challenging, okay? So he says, and concerning the matters you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, he's either answering saying it is good for a man not to touch a woman, or he's saying the question you asked me was, is it good for a man not to touch a woman? Because he kind of addresses it from both points of view. All right, now, the Greek word here, okay, translated touch, means to fasten oneself to adhere to cling to actually physically touch or to know in a carnal way, like sexually, all right? Now, he says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman, but because of whoring, and we'll explain what that is in a minute, let each one have his own wife and let each woman have her own husband. Remember, we're talking about the roles of men and women. So we're still dealing with the husband role and the wife role here. In another teaching, next teaching, the one after that, we're going to deal more with just the roles in general. Some of those things, we're still dealing with husband and wife roles. Because guess what? That's kind of the most pressing and primary roles that we deal with. Okay, because either you are one of those or you want to be one of those or you were one of those. It's kind of, you either were, want to be, or are a husband or a wife. Okay. So he says, but because of whoring. So the word translated whoring is porneia, okay? A form of the word porneia, which refers to sexual behavior that is forbidden. Now, this is the same word when it talks about putting away. When we did the teaching on divorce, remarriage, and putting away. And it says you should not put away except for porneia. So people have always misunderstood this, and this is why I'm not going to teach all of this in detail today, because I have to go and actually go to the verses. But porneia, in my understanding, is referring to sexually forbidden behavior according to Torah. Now, you might say, well, it's talking about adultery. No, adultery is forbidden behavior, but it has already very specific penalties to it. So it's not probably referring to adultery. Adultery is already dealt with. Okay, so adultery is already a clean, straightforward problem. Actually, maybe not so clean. I'll explain it in the next teaching when we get to that whole thing about sexual relations and what's proper, what's not proper. But now let's understand okay, that this is referring probably to things like in Leviticus 18, 20, and the 7th commandment. 7th commandment is the adultery one. So like in Leviticus 20, I'll go there for a second just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So in Leviticus 20, when it talks about, let's say in verse 17, and a man who takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness and sees his nakedness, it is wickedness. A man who lies with a woman during her sickness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister. I mean, all these nakedness uncoverings are really sexual things. It's not just like they saw them naked. Like, oh my gosh, you pulled their clothing off and now whatever. Or they happen to walk out of somewhere and you saw them. This is talking about doing something sexually with them. It's just a phrase that they use instead of saying the actual sexual act. They're just saying, because it could be any sexual act. It doesn't have to be intercourse, but you're not supposed to be sexual with the sister of your, whatever it says in here, right? All those different things that we list. I already turned the page back, okay? So these are things that would be porneia. Okay, because some people say, well, it's fornication, and fornication means if you're not married and you're having sex. That's not what the word means in the scriptures. That may be part of it, but I'm saying it's not what the word means. It really has to do with forbidden sexual acts in addition to or other than just adultery, which has its own issue. Because even when we go to Matthew, when we're talking about this putting away thing, which, by the way, go listen to the teaching. It doesn't say anything about divorce in that section. Okay, Yeshua did not talk about divorce there. Okay? He's talking about putting away. All right, now, putting away is a very different thing. And the issue is you can't do that except for porneia. You get a divorce for lots of reasons, okay? You don't need that for divorce. Porneia you need for putting away. Putting away is actually a very harsh punishment on the person you're putting away. So it's something that is forbidden. Now, if it was adultery, you wouldn't put them away. They'd get stoned, and the person who they did adultery with. So you're not putting someone away for adultery. Now, there's only two choices with adultery. Stay with them and be okay with it, or there's a stoning thing going on. All right? There's not a choice of just putting them away. Now, porneia is other things that are sexually forbidden, just so we kind of get that in there. Okay. And that's covered in Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, and and other places where it goes into these lists of talking about people, your sister, the daughter of this one, the wife of that one. So you're not supposed to be intimate with your father's wife. You're not supposed to be intimate with your mother. You're not supposed to be intimate. The things that you're not supposed to do. And daughters of, even though you might have different parents, but it's still, you have one parent in common. You don't have, those verses, that's what's talking about porneia. All right? Those are the kinds of things we're talking about with porneia. So what it's saying here, let's understand. It is good for a man not to touch a woman, but because of this porneia, let each one have his wife and her have his own husband. So that's, in other words, if you're going to be sexually motivated and driven, that's the point of 1 Corinthians 7, a big part of it, then have a wife or a husband so you can do that with the appropriate person. Because porneia is all about doing things with the wrong person, an inappropriate interaction. Because the person is someone you shouldn't be doing that with, okay? Now, we'll get into more details about all of that in the teaching that I want to do about that. But let's just understand that as far as our roles, it's saying all of your sexual stuff needs to be husband and wife in this context. That other stuff, we're not doing that, okay? Let's follow this forward as we keep going, okay? Actually, I'm going to take us quickly to quote Hebrews 13:4, when it says, let marriage be respected by all and the bed be undefiled, but Elohim shall judge those who whore and adulterers. In other words, you don't have in the bed your sister, your cousin, from different, whatever, the relationships that he says no. Okay? So when he's talking about an undefiled bed, he's not just saying, look, it's okay to take out your trapeze and your trampoline, which is fine. Okay? But he's saying, it gets defiled when you have a bed with you and somebody you should not be with in that bed, okay? Now, it's important, okay? All right, let's go now to verse 3. We're still in 1 Corinthians now 7. So let the husband render to his wife what is her due, and likewise also the wife to her husband. So apparently, we're going to see here that there's an issue with if you're not rendering what is due, somebody may go off and do what they should not do. Don't panic yet. There's a whole thing's going to get laid out here. Because some of you are thinking, oh, there's a big open door for some abuse here. Yes, there is. We're going to fix all that. Just be patient. All right, this is the teaching you guys wanted, I know. All right? So, he says, the context is because of, it's not just good for a man just to touch a woman, but in the context of marriage, it's absolutely appropriate. And if you're in marriage, you're not going to do things that are porneia, because you have that now in the right context. All right? Well, what if you're cheating? Well, cheating has a different issue. Okay, the adultery issue that could be there. All right, now, verse 4. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Now, this is where the abuse can come in. He says, listen in verse 5 before I explain verse 4. Do not deprive one another except with agreement for a time. You're married to me? If I want access to your body, I should have it. You want access to mine, you should have it. Unless we agree for a time. Okay? So that's, again, maybe a marriage problem. Maybe you don't want to have as much intimacy as the other person wants to, and you're not in agreement. Now you have a marriage problem. Okay? So this is saying that you need to come to agreement, but you have to say, do not deprive one another. Look, ladies, more than anybody, more than the men, use it as a weapon. I'm not giving you access if I'm not happy with what you're doing. And it's going to only hurt you. You're going to end up with nothing. You're going to have a man who doesn't care about you. He's going to cheat on you probably or some other. You cannot deprive him of what he needs access-wise. And it can go the other way too. But let's be realistic. In most cases, ladies, don't get mad at me if you're the exception. But in most cases, it's the man that wants access more often than the woman. The way he designed us, okay? And so, and guys, pay attention. I said this the other day to somebody so that we can understand how we're wired. Ladies, you need to understand this and appreciate it, and so do the men. Men are wired visually to be stimulated and not needing a whole lot in their heart and their head to be right, to be willing to have sex. I mean, you're going to be fighting. If you're going to go ahead and offer it, he might just take it anyway. Okay? We're just designed that way. Men, however, if a lady's head and heart are not in the right place, you don't get access below. They don't want to give you access below because they're connected, they're hardwired. For a man, you know how they talk about the little head and the big head? Okay? They think independently, they don't need to be hardwired, they don't have to be even on the same page. For the ladies, though, the above and the below, they're hardwired. They have to be on the same page. So guys, you need to know that. You got to win their head and their heart over to access the rest of it. Just because you don't care, and in any mood you're in, you're ready to go, that doesn't work that way. But ladies, you got to understand, it's not his fault. Because I've had ladies say, man, I got married, I didn't realize he wanted it like every day. I thought he was a pervert. No, he's a man. Okay? He's just a man. And yes, ladies, he probably wants it every day, maybe even more than once. And I know you might not, but that's okay. Guys need to accept that too. That's where you have to come together by agreement. Okay? So he says, do not deprive one another except with agreement for a time, to give yourselves to fasting, to prayer, or whatever else. He just let those be the two he's mentioned. Those are not the only two reasons, okay? If my wife is going through a hard time and says to me, look, I'm just in a bad place, I'm just not interested in that right now, I need to be able to allow that by agreement, okay? Or maybe I'm going through something and I'm not interested for whatever reason, okay? That still can happen. Men can still not be interested for reasons that are going on, under stress or strain or some other thing. And so, but you talk about it and there's an agreement. It's not like one or the other wondering, how come you're not giving me access? Why do you keep shutting me down? Why are you blocking me? Why are you just not giving me that attention? But look, it's an issue, which is why Paul brings it up, because why do people do porneia? Because there's still that sexual drive. And so if we don't have a proper place for the sexual drive, we're going to find an improper place for the sexual drive. Because I I don't know, maybe I'm out on a limb here. I think it's one of the strongest, if not the strongest drives you have. Okay, as far as the power of the drive, the emotion that gets you to want that, okay? And so just keep that in mind. So he's saying, look, in these relationships, he starts off with the problem. The problem is whoring, the porneia. The solution, be married and don't deprive each other. I gotta promise you right now, most of your marriages, whatever level of suffering you're having, is because you're not intimate enough. You're just not. And you can fix a lot of your problems by being intimate more. By intimate, I mean, how about just laying in bed together and holding each other and talking? I'm not saying it has to be just intercourse. It doesn't have to just be sex. But how about the intimacy of holding each other, all right? You've seen me in public to some degree. If my wife walks within any few feet of me anytime at the house, I'd walk over and give her a hug. I get a few seconds of holding. I give her a kiss, and then we go on and maybe do other things, whatever. But if we're within any distance where I can just walk over and be intimate to some degree and hold and express love, I do it. You see it also here. If she's anywhere near, I walk up to her, I go and give her a hug. I do that everywhere. She's learning to do that for me too. She's seeing I need that. So she'll come up to me now and do that. Ladies, you got to learn. Remember we talk about observing, paying attention, learning your spouse, and then adjusting to seeing what works and is important to them. Intimacy is something that often ends up in sexual interaction, but it doesn't have to. But you don't deprive from one another that physical access, holding, caressing, just snuggling even, okay? Otherwise, a person who has needs, you know that a baby dies if it's not touched? A baby that comes out of the womb and it doesn't get touched and held dies. They need that physical touch. Guess what? A relationship where you're not touching each other will die, or it's already dead if you've been doing it long enough, or not doing it long enough. Okay, you need to have that physical touch. So he's saying, don't deprive one another. Deprive means that you're purposely keeping it from the other person. Some of the men do this too. Ladies more often, but look, all of you need to knock it off. Now, some of you may say to me, but I'm just not interested. Now, maybe you're not interested because you have a relational problem. Well, then you need to fix the relational problem or end the relationship, because it's not doing you or the other person any good. Or maybe you may be like the females, like the ladies go through some of these changes in life and they're just not as interested, as maybe they were before, because their hormonal thing is different. And well, you know what? That shouldn't change the fact that he needs it. Well, but I don't want to, so why should I give it to him? Because he needs it and he wants it. By the way, do you need money to buy food and pay the bills? And so he goes to work. Do you think he wants to? Most of them don't. Most people don't love what they do. You do what you need to do for the other person. So whether you want to or not, he's saying don't deprive it now unless you have an agreement. Ladies, it's okay to say, I'm not in the right place today. Can we do it tomorrow or something like that? Or whatever. Just have an agreement, have a conversation. Guys, you need to find out if there's a reason, then you have to adjust and be fair to that reason, and have compassion and have a heart for them not being in that place. And you need to be okay with that. Don't force yourself. Look, I don't care if you're married, it'll still feel almost like rape if you force yourself, okay? Don't impose yourself. But ladies, give access. There has to be some sort of agreement on what that looks like for you, okay? Every couple has to figure out what that looks like for them. Okay? I'm not dictating what that should look like. Well, you should be doing it this many times a week. No, it's whatever works for you. Maybe for you, your couple, maybe once a week works for both of you. That's not a problem. I still think the intimacy should be more often, at least hold each other. Okay? And this is something that I think, you need to kind of figure that out. Spend time just, not sexually, but just intimate, which could lead to more, because when you're intimate, guess what? The lady's head starts going in the right direction. The guy's already in the right direction. Okay, so guys, be intimate first. You know what? I find really works. So ladies like to talk more than guys often. And maybe it's stuff that guys are like, ugh. You know what? So ladies, hold your man, snuggle with him, and then see if he'll be okay letting you talk while he's getting access. It's like, hey, I getting what I want, talk all you want. Okay? Just, okay? I'm just saying, it may be easier to listen to all that stuff when you're naked. I don't know. So tell me about your day. First, let's get undressed. Okay, tell me all about your day. Okay? And look, you're already in a position to comfort them. Oh, I feel so bad for you. And you're holding them, and you could stroke their hair, and all right. I told you, this is the teaching we're all like ready for. Okay, here we go. So then he says, do not deprive one another except for agreement for a time to give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again, listen, so the adversary does not try you because of your lack of self-control. He's recognizing that we all, because of that strong drive for intimacy, I don't want to just call it a sex drive, it's an intimacy thing. Okay, people confuse it sometimes. They think it's just about the sex, then they get the sex and they feel empty still, because it wasn't just about the sex. They wanted the intimacy that includes physical stuff. So we have a problem with control in those areas. That's why people cheat. That's why people go and do porneia. That's why people do all kinds of things, because they need the intimacy and they don't have the discipline, if they have none, not to go out and find it. Now, gentlemen and ladies, and by the way, we're going to read some verses that give you both permission. Some people ask me this question all the time. Well, I didn't know the scripture let the ladies divorce or the ladies do that. There's some verses we're going to read that literally says, ladies, you can do these things. If you're not getting what you need in your relationship, all of you need to hear this. Do not go out and get it somewhere else inappropriately. Okay? Don't get it. Leave the relationship. Okay? Because you need to understand how this all works out and do it correctly. Okay? He says, so Hasatan can get inside there and test you because you have a self-control problem. He says, so don't deprive one another. That keeps Hasatan at bay. All right? I don't know if this is a good analogy, but a lot of you know who Murphy is? Murphy's Law, right? And so one of the things we teach in financial classes is having money keeps Murphy away, right? You have an emergency fund. Murphy tends to stay away a little bit more than he shows up when you're broke. Man, you're broke, Murphy's all over you. Everything's breaking, everything's falling apart, nothing works, you got to replace everything. But you put some money aside, and somehow Murphy doesn't seem to hang around too much. Murphy's Law is whatever can go wrong will go wrong, okay? Okay, so this is the same thing. Hasatan's got nothing to work with if you're not depriving each other and you're being intimate and you're doing what you need to with your spouse. Okay, then you don't have this problem. All right? Then you don't have this problem. No, I'm not going to go there. Okay, maybe later. There was something I was going to say, and I don't want to open that door here yet. All right. I don't even know why I told you all that. All right. Verse 6, I say this as a concession, not as a command. Okay, so he's not saying a command, he's saying, I'm saying, look, I recognize that there's a problem. So I'm telling you this is what's going on, okay? Now the reason he says as a concession, Paul's gonna make a case here, eventually, that nobody should get married. Everybody should just focus on Yahweh, because Paul thinks the world is ending. Okay, you gotta understand where he's coming from. He thinks it's imminent. Messiah's coming, Rome is coming, the end of the world is coming, everything's about to blow up. And so don't be distracted with marriage and all that other stuff. Just focus on the Torah and Yahweh and Yeshua, because you can't be distracted right now. But he says, but I realize you have drives and desires, and so this is a concession. Because later on in the chapter, he's going to talk about whatever state you're in. If you're single, stay single. If you're married, stay married, whatever. Because he's going to say, look, it can be a distraction. And being married, he said, is a distraction. Because you know what? A husband needs to focus on his wife. The wife has to focus on the husband. That distracts you from giving 100% just vertically. But you know what? You can't give 100% vertically when your intimacy meter is freaking out because you're not getting any kind of attention. So, look, Paul is imperfect. I'll disagree with him on some things. But I'm just telling you where he's coming from. He's coming from this as a single man who thinks the world is ending. Just keep this perspective. So I may not agree with him on everything. I'm not saying I have any problem with his theology. I don't have any problem with his Torah understanding. But he's also talking to a bunch of people at a time in history where he thought it was imminently happening. Okay? And he was wrong. He wasn't perfect. He's not a prophet where Yahweh told him the words to say. He's a teacher. He's a prophet from the idea of speaking the word with authority. He's not like a prophet like Isaiah or Jeremiah who just said only what Yahweh told him to say. Okay? You read those and said, thus said Yahweh. Yahweh said this, Yahweh said that. You're not getting any opinions from them. This is Paul talking to the Corinthians, and he has a lot of opinions. And they're based on the world. Look, I have a lot of opinions too, based on the world we live in today that I share with you. So hopefully that gives you perspective, right, as we're going through this. So as I say this as a concession, not as a command. We don't understand what the concession thing is yet, but that's going to come later on. He says, "But I wish that all men were even as myself." I'll actually explain to you here a little bit. "But each one has his own gift from Elohim, one in this way and one in another." So he's saying, I wish everybody would just be single like me and just focus everything on Yahweh. But you know what? Not everybody can do that. Because he designed us, and by the way, that's not a weakness and flaw in you. He designed us to reproduce. And you know what? Especially if you've had children or seen other people's children, you may not be all that excited about reproducing, except that you have a drive to do the thing that makes the reproduction. He makes it something you desire and is so pleasurable so that you would do it and make more people. Otherwise, you might not do it, okay? And so this is, what he's talking about here. Now, he says, each one has his own gift from Elohim, and he's talking about your status as married or single. He's not talking about other gifts here, okay? And I say to the unmarried, okay, and I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. Okay, so it's good if you stay that way under the world circumstance of the moment. Okay? So all of you that are widowed or unmarried, he's not saying it's better for you to not marry. He's saying in that world where he was, that was his thought. However, he said, but if they do not have self-control, let them marry. So I'm not forbidding them from marriage. He says, if you have a drive for the intimacy that you need in a relationship, then go ahead and get married. For it is better for them to marry than to burn. And by the way, the burn there is not talking about hell. It's talking about then to burn with passion, okay? Better that they marry, because if they burn with passion, they may do porneia, okay? Because single people, by the way, single women, you can't do adultery, okay? But you can do porneia. Okay, adultery is a married person thing, okay? So he's saying don't do porneia. You're single, you want to have sexual interaction and everything else, then make sure you're doing what's appropriate and go ahead and get married. That's okay. All right? Now, there's a lot more to this we'll get into in the other class, okay? But I'm trying to make sure you understand this chapter, the roles of men and women. And to the married I command, this is now in verse 10. Okay, and by the way, in the translation, just remember again, when I said it's better than to marry than to burn, go look up the word. The word burn there isn't talking about hell. It's talking about burning with desire and passion, okay? Okay, now, people say things like, I'm on fire for you, or it's a burning love or burning passion, all right? All right, now, verse 10. And to the married I command, not I, but the master, a wife should not separate from her husband, okay? Now, let's understand. He's saying this isn't from me, but it's from the master. Separate is not talking about divorce. Okay, separate here is not talking about divorce, okay? It is talking about the idea of let's see, I said here, wife should not separate from a husband. This is talking about separation, not divorce. If she is separated, let her remain unmarried. Okay, it's talking about separating. So that means don't just cut your husband off and be separate, but you're together. Don't act like a single person while you're married. Separate means you're not coming together, you're depriving each other. You can go ahead and get a divorce. But he's saying, don't separate. You'll see later that women can absolutely do things, okay? This is context, patience, right? Now, he says to the married, I command, not the man, a wife should not separate from a husband. But if she is indeed separated, oh, wait a minute. She shouldn't separate, but if she's separated. So in other words, you should be making the effort to be together or go officially sever the relationship so you're not actually married anymore. Okay? But if she's indeed separated, let her remain unmarried and be restored to favor with her husband. Oh, so separated doesn't mean divorce here. Somehow she's out of favor with her husband and they're now sleeping in different parts of the house and barely talking to each other. You understand what I'm saying? Okay? He said, so be restored to your husband because you're still married. There's some people that are still married, but they're acting like they're not married. Okay? He said, and let a husband not send a wife away. This is that idea of putting away, so don't send your wife away. You can divorce her, don't just send her away. Then we get into all kinds of adultery and porneia possibilities, okay? We don't need to do that. So don't let a husband pass. So the wife, you don't leave, get a divorce. Don't just leave. Men, don't just send your wives away, get a divorce. Do it right, okay? Or better, restore the relationship. Work to restore the relationship. Verse 12. And to the rest I say, not the master. Okay, now he's talking. It's not the master. If any brother has an unbelieving wife, and she thinks well to live with him, let him not send her away. If your wife is a not believing wife, but she's not doing anything else problematic as a wife, but she just doesn't believe like you do, don't send her away if she thinks it's, well to live with him. In other words, if she's okay with it. He says, and a woman who has an unbelieving husband and he thinks well to live with her, let her not send him away. Oh, wait a minute, they can both do it. Just so you know, the instruction's that way because they both can do it, and he's telling them not to, if it's for this reason. There are reasons, though, to send people away. There are reasons to get divorced. For the unbelieving husband has been set apart in the wife, and the unbelieving wife has been set apart in the husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they are set apart. I'm not going to explain that verse and all the complexity of that right now. Just understand that you don't know what the Father will do if you stay, okay? He says, and now if the unbelieving one separates, let him separate himself. A brother or a sister has not been enslaved in such matters, but Elohim has called us to peace, okay? So in this section, 12 through 17, we haven't finished yet, okay? Understand, this is Shaul now speaking for himself. He said so in case we're not clear. And he's making it clear that they can each do sending away, but he's saying that they shouldn't if the person is willing to live with them. In other words, they're okay in a supportive way, saying, this isn't going to be contentious in a fight. Okay? And some of you have spouses that are not on the same page in terms of covenant, but they're willing to let you and keep it reasonably peaceful. Because it says then the verse he said at the end of it was about peace, okay, having peace. All right, the end of verse 15. But Elohim has called us to peace, okay? Now, if, in verse 16 now, verse 16 said, if the unbelieving one separates, let him separate himself, a brother, sister, etc. Verse 16, and how do you know, a wife, whether you shall save your husband, or how do you know, a husband, whether you shall save your wife? So I'm not actually talking about saving like the Christian sort of thought. How do you not know that through your being there with someone who's willing to let you be there in peace, that you may not be what wins them over because they see your example, and Abba uses that as a way to bring them around, delivers them into the truth and out of ignorance? How do you know that that won't happen? I know a lot of couples where only one of them got it and the other one got it later. Sometimes a good long while later, sometimes just a little while later, but it can happen. Because I've had people call me up, well, you know, my spouse doesn't believe this, so I think I might need to get a divorce. Well, how is your spouse treating you? Are they supportive, meaning are they allowing you to do all the things you need to do? Or are they hindering, especially aggressively hindering? If they're aggressively hindering, you might need a divorce. But if they're allowing without hindrance, they allow you to keep Shabbat, they allow you to eat the way you're supposed to, they allow you to tithe, they allow you to go to feasts. In other words, if they're not hindering you in any way, then you may want to just stay. Because you don't know if that may be used to deliver your spouse, is what he's talking about here, okay? Only as Elohim has distributed each one, as the master has called each one, so let him walk, and so I order in all the assemblies. I order. So this is still Paul talking, okay, and giving those orders, okay? Now, so again, let's remember that in verse 15, it says, and if an unbelieving one separates, let him separate himself. A brother or a sister has not been enslaved in such matters. Meaning they both can make decisions to free themselves out of that bondage. Ladies, pay attention. I get a lot of ladies calling me saying, well, you know, I really don't want to be married to my husband, but I know a woman can't divorce her husband. That's Catholic Christian junk. That is not scripture. And some of you are thinking, well, there's the verse right there. Both sides are discussed equally. They each can make the decision to go or stay. All right? I don't see this any way to read it differently. So let's make sure we are freeing ourselves of that just nonsense. Okay, freeing ourselves of the nonsense. Now, the next section here, okay, again, is helping us to build a case. He's trying to build a case for staying as you are. Remember, his perspective is the world is ending. He says, was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not become circumcised. So what is he saying? Whatever you are, stay that way. So by circumcised, this has nothing to do with circumcision, by the way. What are you talking about? He just used the word twice. It has to do with, was anyone called while Jewish? Then let him not become Gentile. Was anybody called Gentile? You don't have to become Jewish. That's just Paul's way of referring to two groups of people. Not whether or not they ever get circumcised. He's talking about being of the circumcision. What is circumcision a sign of? Covenant. The Jews are born into covenant. By the way, it doesn't really avail them anything if they do nothing with it. Because Paul also gives other verses in discussions to, if your circumcision, you behave like an uncircumcision, then your circumcision is basically, might as well be uncircumcision. In other words, you're covenanted by birth, so what? If you act like a Gentile, you're a Gentile. I don't care if you're circumcised by birth. Now, he says, let's take this to the next thing. The circumcision is nothing, and the uncircumcision is nothing, but guarding the commands of Elohim, that matters. In other words, it doesn't matter what you were born. Don't worry about changing your status, okay? Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. In other words, you can be a Gentile who's now an Israelite, or you could be a Jew who's an Israelite. You don't have to become a Jew and still to be an Israelite. You still got to keep all the commandments, which includes circumcision. But you don't have to become a Jew. If you are a Jew, he says, great, stay one. Don't start acting like a Gentile. Let each one remain in the same call. This is the theme here. He wants everybody basically to remain as they are because he's thinking the world is ending. All right? Were you called while a slave? It matters not to you, but if you are able to become free too, rather use it. In other words, if you're a slave, figure out how to do this as a slave. If you're free, do it as a free person. He says, for he who is called in the master while a slave is the master's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is a slave of Messiah. So he's trying to say it doesn't matter which one you are, it still ends up being essentially the same thing. You could be a slave, but yet you're free in Messiah, or you could be free, but you're a slave of Messiah. For he who is called in the master while a slave is the master's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is a slave of Messiah. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Do not become slaves of men. Now, again, he's going to hit the theme again. Brothers, let each one remain with Elohim in that calling in which he was called. This is the theme Paul's trying to get to here, is about it's okay to stay where you are. As a matter of fact, he's encouraging it. but that's based on the times that he's talking in. And concerning maidens, I have no command from the master, but I give judgment as one whom the master in his compassion has made trustworthy. Okay? And maidens can be virgins. Maidens just could be young women who have not been married. Okay? Who've never been married. It's talking about someone who's never been married at the least. It could be those who've never had any sexual interaction as well. Okay? But this is not the same verse that's usually used, word that's usually used specifically for virgin necessarily. Okay? It can go either way. He goes, I think then that it is good because of the present necessity. You see? This is Paul admitting it's based on the present circumstances. That it is good for a man to remain as he is. I think that is good because of the present necessity that a man should remain as he is. So he used the circumcision thing just as an example of what he's talking about, not that it was a separate little teaching. He's saying, just like in this case, which I've talked about in other places, Paul's saying, I want you to understand that where you are as a man or a woman, I think you should stay whatever you are. There's no time for that other stuff in his mind, okay? He says, verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. So he's not telling us to not do any of these things in the next 2,000 years since him saying these things. He's saying in the present necessity, which by the way, this is Paul writing, I'm not sure how close to the Roman siege of Jerusalem, but this is heading into those directions. These are later writings after Yeshua had been resurrected. And I'm sure that Rome didn't just show up without people thinking, we're poking the bear, they're going to come at some point, okay? And so, he's thinking we're all in, it's almost like he saw the siege of Jerusalem and Rome coming as something that was coming soon, okay? He says, but even if you should marry, verse 28, you have not sinned. And if a maiden should marry, she is not sin. He's saying none of this is sin. I'm just saying I think it's optimal at this moment under all this craziness that you shouldn't be looking at those things right now. This is not the time to be doing all of that. But that was 2,000 years ago, right? And that was what his opinion was where he was. You know what? If I was him at the time, I might have thought similar things. I don't know. It was a very, very crazy, dangerous time. We can't understand and relate to it. We don't live in a world like that now. Now, there are parts of the world that have similar things maybe, but we don't live. Most of the people watching this right now don't live in that kind of world, okay? I mean, we panic about end times and, gas prices go up. Really? These people are at danger of rape and death on a very regular basis. And having everything taken from them, their houses burned and whatever. You don't have that risk at the moment. At the moment, who knows, but at the moment, certainly not. Okay? So, he says, again, if you should marry, you've not sinned. If a maiden should marry, she's not sinned. But such shall have pressure in the flesh, but I would spare you. In other words, I would spare you that. For some reason, I don't know what kind of miserable marriage this man had. He's not a big fan. Guess what? I know some people having had a bad marriage that are not big fans, okay? He is certainly not a big fan. And this I say, brothers, the time is short. There it is again. So that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they have none. And those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use this world as not misusing it. For the scene of this world is passing away. This is him again giving you the context of his perspective, what's going on in the world at that time, right? What is going on in the world at that time, okay? Now, he continues here. And I wish you to be without concern. He just gave them all these things to be concerned about. Don't be afraid of it, though. He who is unmarried is concerned about the matters of the master, how to please the master. Okay, we use this as part of the blessing of the unmarried when we have our Friday night service, right? He said, but he who is married is concerned about the matters of the world, how to please his wife. And that's true. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean you're not trying to do both. The problem is, if you're not married, you don't have the distraction of trying to do both, you just have the one. But you also have the distraction of not wanting to be single, which a lot of people have. And yes, there's a point maybe in your life you get old enough where you just decide you really rather just be single. But I'm saying until you get to that point, it's distracting. Okay? Now, he goes, there's a difference between a wife and a maiden. The unmarried woman is concerned about the matters of the master, that she might be set apart both in body and spirit. But she who is married is concerned about the matters of the world, how to please her husband. Same type of thing, okay? And he doesn't really get into the difference between a wife and a maiden. He says there's a difference and doesn't tell us what it is. So we'll leave that for right now. It'll probably come in the next teaching. Not next week, but like the next series that I might do. All right. So he says the same thing basically to the woman that he said to the man. Having a wife or having a husband does distract or split your attention, which is by design. He wants you to give the attention to the spouse. Not in terms of costing your attention to him, but dividing that attention appropriately where you love him most, you love her next. You love him most, you love him next, whatever, whichever side you're on in that equation, okay? And he says, and this I say for your own good, not to put a restraint on you, but he just did, but for what is proper and to attend to the master without distraction. He's saying, I'm not trying to restrain you, but I need you at this time, which is about to blow up in our faces, in his opinion, and it did, okay? Because this is happening as we get closer to 70 when the whole thing blows up in his world. He's saying, I don't want you to be distracted. I want you to be able to focus on the master, attend to the master without distraction. Okay, this is his focus, okay? I wrote in my notes here, Shaul believes they're in a dangerous end time sort of period and gives his guidance about being single or married in that context. This is purely his opinion. He also explains his reasoning based on the potential distraction that marriage relationships bring. Okay, I understand where he's coming from, all right? Now, and if anyone thinks, let's see where we're up to. And if verse 36, where are we on time? We're good. If anyone thinks he's behaving improperly toward his maiden, if she is past the flower for youth, and so it should be, let him do what he desires. He does not sin. Let them marry. So again, it's not getting into the details of what all it's talking about. He's simply saying, you have a choice, you can still marry. He's trying to tell people not to do it, but he's saying, look, but there are circumstances where, hey, let them marry, okay? But he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity for what? That drive towards intimacy and needing a physical human being to be intimate with, right? He says, having no necessity and has authority over his own desire, and has so decided in his heart to guard his own maiden, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. Again, in his opinion, in that circumstance, you could read this and make a justification that nobody should ever get married. Then we would have no more people, no more children, and we'd have a bunch of people who are hypocrites who'd all be doing porneia. They'd all be doing all the sexually inappropriate things because they really can't control themselves, all right? But they're going to think, well, I can't get married because Paul said not to. No, Paul said if you can control yourself, then maybe being single is a good thing. If your desire is there, then marriage is your answer. So he does keep coming back to letting them do, even though he also says, I think it's better if you don't. Okay? A wife is bound by Torah as long as her husband lives, and if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whomever she desires, only in the master. Okay, but she's better off if she remains as she is. I'm not going to get into the if the husband dies thing. That was covered in the divorce and remarriage teaching. But the last verse I wanted to get to here is verse 40, where it says, but she's better off if she remains as she is, according to my opinion. Okay? So let's understand that we take Paul correctly when he's speaking from himself. All right? He says, and I think I also have the spirit of Elohim. So he says, I think my opinion has some value. And it probably did in that world at that time. We are not in that world. It is not that time. And we do not have things happening in this world right now that are anywhere near what he was dealing with then. Okay? And so, remember, he saw the world through, how many times was he shipwrecked and flogged and arrested and almost died and all these other things? He's looking through a very different world. He's seen people up on posts being crucified, lining the highways. He's seen, raping and pillaging and conquest. It's a very short memory back to the Maccabees, okay? And when we look back a few hundred years to the foundation of this country, it was not more than that necessarily back to the Maccabees for him, okay? It's only a couple hundred years, not even. And so they remember the whole thing with the Greeks and the destruction of the temple and all of the other things that were happening. And by the way, in that world, these things happened on a very regular basis. Israel, where it was located, was constantly going under somebody else's authority, whether Egypt, whether Assyria, whether the Babylonians, whether the Romans or the Greeks. Their location was right in the middle of the mess. And it was a place everybody traveled between wherever they were going. They got trampled on in the middle. They were never the destination, they were just in the way. So whoever went through it took it over on their way to whatever else they were doing, okay? They were not the destination. When conquest was headed north from, say, like Egypt and Africa, North Africa, headed up into Europe, okay, well, guess what? They went through Israel. When it came the other way, it went through Israel. Because of their location. The Mediterranean, right there, brought them right across to Europe, okay? Which is where Paul is teaching, in basically in that sort of area of the world. And so Paul's world is a whole different reality. Look, we've lived here for 200 years plus where there has not been a battle on this country's land since the establishment of the country. I mean, we did have a little Civil War thing, but nobody has come in, outside invaders, to take us over. We don't have that memory of that kind of reality. They had that. That was part of their reality. And it was always a matter of time, or only a matter of time, when it would happen again. Plus, Paul had the understanding that Messiah was returning and bringing a kingdom. And I said, every generation, including the apostles, thought it was in their time. So if you really thought that it was end times, which we have a lot of people out there really think it is now, every generation has that, and they start telling people, I know people, for example, that in the 70s, or in whatever year you want to go back to, stopped, sold all their stuff, sold their house, moved to some place because they thought it was over. Or they decided not to get married, they decided not to have kids, they made all these decisions because they thought the world was over. I'm not claiming to be smarter than Paul, but my advice to you has always been, or my guidance has always been, plan your life going forward as if he's not coming in your lifetime. Live your life in terms of your reverence, obedience, and walk as if he's coming tomorrow. Okay? Behave as if he's coming tomorrow. Plan and make decisions like he's not coming. I don't mean like ever, like in your lifetime. So plan for children and grandchildren and whatever else you need to do. If he comes sooner, well, then you don't get to do all of those things. Hey, that's fine. But if you don't plan for it and he doesn't come, which has happened for 2,000 years, you're going to be setting yourself up for all kinds of really bad situations because you will not be prepared for him not to be here while you're so busy preparing for him to come. So do both. Live your life so you're ready when he comes. But plan your life like it may be the next generation that gets to see him return, okay? And so make decisions with that being in mind, okay? Make your choices knowing that that is the program. All right, now, I'm hoping that that helped to clarify. Let's go back through it again. Husbands and wives, we're still dealing with that role. We're going to shift a little bit after this teaching into just men and women in general, right? But this teaching with men, husbands and wives. Understand, okay? Understand. Well, actually, we got a little bit more with husbands and wives coming as well, but this is really the focus here. The intimacy thing is what's being addressed here. And the intimacy, if it's not handled correctly, if it's not handled wisely, will tempt because of the lack of self-control. That's not a judgment, by the way. Nobody's calling you weak. It's hard to control what he gave you in such a strong way. He designed us to strongly desire intimacy. It's a hard thing to control. So when you are married, you can fix that whole problem. Single people have a real different challenge. But if you are married, you should have that problem handled by not depriving each other of intimacy, but by giving the intimacy on a very regular basis as agreed by both of you, okay? One wants it more than the other, fine. Find something you both agree on. You're not going to get there if one decides it has to be my way. By the way, nowhere in here does it say that the man just decides it has to be whatever he wants. Okay, if you can't agree to whatever your wife wants, then maybe you need a different wife, or maybe she needs a different husband. But you should come, because if you can't agree, you don't have a marriage. Marriage is an agreement. And you got to find a way to come into agreement. Enough disagreement, you got a real problem. Okay? Intimacy disagreements creates a real problem, because then what happens is I know this is kind of a esoteric term, you say that I don't love him anymore. I don't love her anymore. I just don't feel in love anymore. Love is a sort of ethereal thing, but you know what? A loveless marriage is not really a marriage. Because then you don't want him to touch you. You don't want her to touch you. Or you don't want to touch her. She doesn't want to touch you. I mean, I don't even just mean sexually. You just don't want to be, it's just like, get away from me. Some of you have been to that place where you're like, just get away from me. I don't want to touch you. I don't even want to look at you. I don't want to talk to you. That needs a divorce. Or it needs a lot of therapy to get fixed. But if it gets that far, it's not probably fixable. Everything's already died. Okay? Plants need to be watered. Human beings need intimacy. Okay? Human beings need intimacy. And intimacy doesn't have to be sexual. One of my children was having a problem a couple of months ago, whatever it was, and I just went over to, actually both of them had this in the last months. I went over and you know what I did? I hugged them and I held them for a little bit, and it helped both of them. They needed to have that intimacy. Now there's intimacy between husband and wife, there's intimacy between a parent and a child. It's a different thing, but it's still intimacy. It's the conveyance through physical touch that I love you and you're safe. For a husband and wife, it's I love you, you're safe, and I desire you. Now, if it's your child, it's just I love you and you're safe, no desire. That's porneia. Okay, that's doing inappropriate and forbidden things. So when you see me with my daughter, you know what you see on her face? Is the smile of I'm safe, right? Everything's okay in the world. My son, it's the same thing. There's times where even he's come to me and just wanted me to hold on to him and just let him know it's going to be all right. But if you're to the point where a husband and wife can't touch each other, can't hold each other, then how are you ever going to tell each other everything's going to be all right? Because words are not going to do it. It's not enough. You need words and actions, okay? Especially for you men. Your wife needs you to hold on and say, I've got you. Look, Elder talked about that during the prayer time, praise time, that when his wife, whatever she went through, he was able to say, I've got you. It's okay. Yeah, something we didn't want to happen, but I've got you, all right? And I'm sure that part of that was going over and holding her and letting her know, I've got you. Not just saying it, okay? And by the way, if you're on the phone and you can't hold her at that point, say it, then when you see her, hold her again and say it again. Okay? Ladies, a guy needs to know, I believe in you. But he wants to be held when you say it. Come over, give him a kiss on the cheek and say, I believe in you. I love you. I trust you. It's got to go both ways. I've got you and I trust you. Okay? Problem is we do too much depriving. We've lost this whole idea of intimacy. Well, I'm older now and my hormones and I just don't have it. So figure out how to fix your hormones. It could be done. I see 5 million commercials for testosterone. I don't see anything for the ladies, because like you ladies, for some reason, don't care. Guys care. They don't want that thing to diminish. Okay? They want that drive to be strong until they hit the grave. For some reason, you ladies are like, yeah, I'm good with it being gone. It was a pain in the neck anyway. But you need it with your husband if you're married. Either figure out a way to just do it because you can do it that way, or if it's just not, then figure out a way to re-spark that. It's chemical. The chemistry changed, so you don't want it as much. That's why when teenagers become, when they become teenagers, they go through puberty, they're raging with these chemicals. And so that's when they're like chasing after each other. The chemical makeup changes, and that's why the ladies especially, that's why it changes everything. The guy's chemistry never changes, but the testosterone level starts to go down, so they just don't have the drive as much. But ladies have a complete change. They go through this menopause thing, changes things very much. You can treat this, okay? But it's if you want to. Or just do it because you want to do it for your husband. You do stuff for your children all the time that you don't want to do, but you do it because it's for them. As a mother, you do these things. Well, do it for your husband because it's for him. Who cares if you want to do it? All right? I've had some of the best dates with my wife on what I used to call honey bunny days. All right? Because that's my nickname for her. I call her honey bunny, right? And a honey bunny day was we'd go and do whatever she wanted all day. I only was concerned with that she was happy. And I did a lot of things, trust me, that I had no interest in doing. Not that they were bad things. Some of you would love to do the things she wanted to do. Not my personality. Hey, let's go and walk around the mall for 4 hours. Yeah, great, I love that. Okay? But yet, I got to hold her hand, and we got to hug every now and then, and we got to sit and have a meal together, and then, and you know what else? Then she gave me my attention another time, knowing that I gave her attention. Because my attention is not the same thing what I want that she wants, right? But that's what we do for the other person, okay? And so, it's kind of like when we sit down to watch TV now, we almost have a little fight the other way around going, no, it's okay, you can watch what you want. And then she goes, no, it's okay, you can watch what you want, okay? So you're thinking about, I don't care if it's not what I want them to have what they want. But see, we're too selfish, so we deprive one another. We're way too selfish. And this is really where we get into so much trouble, okay? So let's just recap here real quickly. To avoid these bad things called porneia, whatever that is, okay? And we'll get into another teaching, we'll get into that in more detail. Marriage is where the intimacy should be. Because porneia, let's call it inappropriate intimacy, okay? We'll just call it that, all right? Now, that being said, I simplified it in real big ways there. But anyway, that being said, he says, look, understand that your body's not yours, it's your spouse's. In other words, if they want access, they should have it, but you should do it by agreement, because if you try to get access and the other person really doesn't want to, you end up with a really bad situation. A lot of resentment, a lot of bitterness. But if you're thinking, not them, see, the problem is people think from themselves, hey, well, your body's not yours, it's mine. No, think about it, my body's not mine, it's yours. You think that way, then you think about allowing them and giving them access. See, the men are thinking, they tell their wives, well, it says in the Bible that your body's not yours, it's mine. Well, it says that my body's not mine, it's yours. Think of it only from your perspective. Your body is theirs. Okay? So then how can I make it available to them? We'll find out how much availability they want. What do they want? Have a discussion, So that you have that, because it's the sexual intimacy that glues us together, okay? That's what glues it together. Look, marriages are really tough. Without that outlet, it'd be brutally impossible, which is why marriages don't last if they don't have that. Okay, but if they have that and that part works, they can usually get through everything else. Just my observation, okay, from lots and lots of thousands of counseling hours with married couples, okay? All right, the rest of this is all about timing and Paul saying, look, stay as you are. So that part is not applicable today to what we're talking about. We're not in those times, we're not dealing with those things. But I just want to make sure that we're hearing this stuff going on here, okay? Now, I think I'm going to end it there because I want to shift gears for the next teaching. I know we got a little bit of a late start, and I know there's going to be a few questions. So that being said, get your questions ready, and we're going to just pray here and close. Father, we come before you, and Father, we are open to receiving the truth about some things here between husbands and wives and intimacy that maybe we were not able to receive before. We're open and wanting to and desiring to understand your understanding, your way of seeing the roles of husbands and wives and the intimacy between them. And so, Father, we thank you for inspiring Shaul to write these words down and talking to the people in Corinth, and that we can then glean from them today and apply them today. So, Father, we ask that you would bring peace into the marital home, that you'd bring intimacy in a right way, that none would deprive access to each other unless they come to it by agreement. And that, Father, that all things they would do as husbands and wives, not just this, would be by agreement. So, Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your patience. We love you so much and appreciate all you do as we come to you now, thanking you and praising you in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen. Amen.